There is a moment that happens in almost every relationship with a narcissistic person, where something inside you knows. You might not have the words for it yet. You might not even fully believe it, but deep down, somewhere beneath all the confusion, your body and your nervous system have already picked up on something that your mind hasn't caught up with yet. That moment of knowing without knowing is real. That feeling of walking on eggshells around someone who claims to love you is not an exaggeration. And if you have been wondering whether what you are experiencing is actually as toxic as it feels, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not imagining things. Today I want to share something with you that I call the 5-second test. It is not a trick, and it is not a game. It is simply an observation technique that can help you gain clarity on whether you are dealing with someone who lacks the emotional capacity for genuine mutual connection. This test is not about catching someone or proving something to them. It is about giving yourself permission to trust what you already know. And it is about helping you stop second-guessing your own reality. Here is how it works. You are going to look for how a person responds to something small that does not go their way. Not a major conflict, not a huge disappointment, not a dramatic moment. Something small. A minor inconvenience, a minor correction, a moment where they do not get the final word. You are going to watch what happens in the first 5 seconds after they realize things did not go the way they wanted. That sounds almost too simple, does it not? That is because the most revealing behaviors are often the smallest ones. When someone is used to controlling their environment, when someone has built their identity around always being right or always being the most important person in the room, their immediate automatic disruption to any small disruption tells you everything you need to know. They do not have time to rehearse a response. They do not have time to put on a mask. The mask slips in those first 5 seconds, and what you see underneath is either emotional maturity or emotional reactivity. Let me walk you through what this looks like in practice, because it is important to understand the difference between healthy and unhealthy responses. Imagine you are having a casual conversation with someone, and you correct a small factual detail. Nothing mean, nothing confrontational, just a simple correction like, "Actually, I think it was Tuesday, not Wednesday." Watch what happens in the next 5 seconds. A person with healthy emotional regulation will either accept the correction gracefully or say something like, maybe you are right. They might ask a follow-up question. They might shrug and move on. Their nervous system does not register this as a threat to their worth. A person who lacks that emotional regulation will react very differently. You might notice a micro-expression of irritation, a slight change in tone, a dismissive comment that subtly puts you down. You might hear something like, "Well, I guess you would remember that better than me," which is actually a way of making you feel guilty for being right. They might change the subject abruptly, or give you a cold response that does not match the energy of the conversation. Or they might do something more subtle, like physically withdrawing or becoming very quiet, while their body language signals displeasure. The key thing here is that the response is disproportionate to the situation. The correction was tiny. The reaction should match that. When it does not, that gap is where the truth lives. Now let me give you another example. You suggest doing something that is not what they had in mind. Maybe you want to go to a different restaurant, or you want to leave a little earlier than they planned, or you express a preference that differs from theirs. Watch their face in the first 5 seconds. Watch their body language. A person with genuine emotional maturity will hear your preference and consider it. They might negotiate, they might compromise, or they might say something like, "I had something else in mind, but let us try yours this time." That is normal. That is healthy relationship behavior. A person who is emotionally imbalanced will show you something different. You might notice them physically tense up. Their expression might shift from pleasant to something more guarded or irritated. They might make a comment that undermines your preference, like, "Well, that place is probably going to be crowded," or "We never do things my way anyway." They might even try to reframe the situation so that your preference becomes about them, like, "I guess I just do not matter in this," which is a way of making you feel selfish for having your own needs. Again, the disproportionality is the signal. A small difference of opinion should not trigger a large emotional response. When it does, that tells you something about their internal world. Let me give you one more example that is actually quite powerful. Watch how someone responds when you set a small, clear, reasonable boundary. You say, "I need some time to myself tonight." You say, "I am not comfortable with that." You say, "I would rather not talk about that right now." Watch what happens in the next 5 seconds. A person who respects boundaries, who sees you as a full human being with your own needs and preferences, will acknowledge your boundary and adjust accordingly. They might feel a little disappointed, but they will respect it. A person who does not have that capacity will react in a different way. They might pressure you gently, using guilt or confusion, like, "But I was really looking forward to seeing you," or "Why would you say something like that?" They might dismiss your boundary as being about them, like, "I guess you just do not enjoy spending time with me." They might get quiet and sulky. They might immediately try to negotiate you out of your own boundary by suggesting alternatives that get them what they wanted in the first place. Or they might respond with something that sounds like understanding, but actually contains a criticism, like, "Okay, I understand. I guess I just text less than you do anyway." Again, none of these reactions are massive blow-ups. They can be very subtle. That is what makes them so confusing. But that is also why the 5-second test is so useful. Because in those first 5 seconds, the person has not had time to reconstruct their behavior. What you see is their raw, automatic response, and that response reveals whether they see you as a person who deserves respect or as an extension of themselves whose job is to meet their needs. Now, I want to be very clear about something here. This test is not a way to diagnose anyone. You are not trying to label someone as a narcissist or put them in a box. You are simply looking at patterns of behavior that give you information. Because what this test reveals is not a specific diagnosis, but a specific pattern, and that pattern is this. When someone consistently responds to small disappointments, minor corrections, and reasonable boundaries with disproportionate emotional reactivity, that tells you they do not have the internal capacity for genuine mutual relationship. They may be able to perform well in the beginning. They may be charming and attentive and make you feel like the most important person in the world. But over time, what you will experience is a relationship where your feelings do not matter as much as theirs, where your needs are secondary to theirs, and where any attempt to assert your own autonomy is met with some form of pushback. This is not about being perfect. Every person has moments where they react poorly to something small. The difference is in the pattern. Does the pattern show recovery? Does the person eventually come back, apologize, show genuine accountability? Or does the pattern show a consistent cycle where small moments of your needs not being met lead to guilt, manipulation, coldness, or resentment? That pattern is what tells you whether this relationship is going to be able to grow into something healthy or whether it is going to remain one-sided. Here is what I want you to do with this information. I want you to stop using your feelings as the only measure of whether something is wrong. I know that sounds strange. I know that part of what keeps people stuck in these relationships is the constant second-guessing, the wondering if they are being too sensitive, the wondering if they are asking for too much. But here is what I want you to understand. Your feelings are data. They are not evidence that something is wrong with you. They are evidence that something is wrong with the dynamic. When you feel like you are always the one adjusting, always the one apologizing, always the one walking on eggshells, your feelings are telling you something real. The 5-second test is a way to confirm what your feelings are already telling you. It gives you an objective observation to point to so that you can stop second-guessing yourself. You are not imagining the inconsistency between how they speak to you and how you deserve to be spoken to. You are not imagining that your needs matter less in this relationship. The 5-second test confirms that. Your nervous system confirms that. Your experience confirms that. So what do you do with this clarity? First, you stop accepting the narrative that you are the problem. If you have been walking on eggshells, if you have been constantly monitoring your words and your tone so as not to set off a reaction, if you have been minimizing your own needs to keep the peace, that is not a sign that you are difficult or too sensitive. That is a sign that the relationship lacks the safety required for authentic expression. Second, you start paying attention to the patterns without judgment. You are not doing this to catch them or to build a case against them. You are doing this to give yourself permission to trust what you know. When you see the pattern clearly enough, you will feel the ground shift under your feet in a good way. You will feel more solid in your own understanding. You will feel less confused. And that clarity is the beginning of everything else. Third, and this is important, you start speaking to yourself with the same respect you wish they would speak to you with. When you catch yourself apologizing for having a preference, for setting a boundary, for asking for something reasonable, pause.
Take a breath. Remind yourself that you are allowed to exist with your own needs. You do not have to perform perfection to deserve basic respect. You do not have to earn the right to have a voice. You have that right simply because you are a human being. Fourth, you start making decisions based on what you know, not on what you hope for. I understand how hard this is. I understand that when you love someone, you want to believe they can change. You want to believe that if you just love them enough, if you just explain yourself clearly enough, if you just give them one more chance, things will get better. But here is what I need you to understand. You cannot love someone into having emotional capacity they do not possess. You cannot reason someone into seeing you as a full person when they are not wired to see anyone that way. You can only control your own choices, your own boundaries, and how much access you give someone to your life and your peace. If the pattern you have observed tells you that this person does not have the capacity for genuine mutual respect, then the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to believe that pattern. Not because you want to leave, not because you want to give up, but because your peace matters. Your emotional safety matters. Your right to be seen and heard and valued in a relationship matters. I know this is hard. I know that leaving or even setting firm boundaries brings its own kind of pain. But I want you to know that the pain of staying in a one-sided dynamic is actually greater over time. It erodes you in ways you might not even notice until you look back. And you deserve better than that. You deserve a relationship where your feelings are considered, where your boundaries are respected, where small disappointments do not turn into guilt trips or cold shoulders. You deserve a relationship where you can say no and still feel safe. You deserve a relationship where the 5-second test would show you something completely different than what it shows you now. So give yourself permission to know what you know. Give yourself permission to trust yourself. Give yourself permission to stop carrying someone else's emotional immaturity as if it were your fault. You did not cause this, and you cannot cure it. But you can choose to protect yourself from it. You can choose to stop normalizing it. You can choose to stop accepting less than you deserve. Healing from this kind of experience takes time, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But the foundation of healing is always the same thing. It is the decision to stop gaslighting yourself.
It is the decision to trust your own experience. It is the decision to believe that what you feel is real and that what you need is valid. You have that foundation already. You have always had it. You just maybe forgot, in the middle of all the confusion, that you were allowed to trust it. So take a breath. Look at the pattern clearly, and then make the next right choice for yourself, whatever that looks like for your life. You are not alone in this, and you are not weak for having been in this. You are strong for having survived it, and you are capable of building something different for yourself. Something that honors who you actually are. Something that feels like peace instead of performance. Something that feels like being known instead of being managed. That is what you deserve, and I hope you give it to yourself.